Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I would remind you, please, if you have not yet silenced your cell phones, please take this opportunity to do so, and please be seated.
Gathered together with great sadness, not surprised, because Fred, unfortunately, has been in terrible decline for a good number of years. But we all dreaded that this day would come. Saying goodbye to a giant, person who was a towering figure in the life of the Orthodox community in Great Neck. For many, many years, active member at the Great Neck Synagogue, then extremely involved, active leadership of the North Shore Hebrew Academy as president of that large institution, and then the Young Israel of Great Neck. It touches all of us deeply in a number of different communities, because Fred and Judy have been there for so long and have done so much for us. The Great Neck, the entire Great Neck community is seriously in mourning. But also the Englewood community, because of the children that are there. We don't have enough words to express our respect for Fred, our incredible gratitude for having known him, for what he did for all of us. We want you to know, Judy, that we will also never forget him. Express our deep sympathies to Naomi, to Daniel and Penina, to Joshua, to Esther, to Michael and to Jennifer, to the many grandchildren, Baruch Hashem, to Omer, Saha, Itamar, David, Rafi, Sarah, Hannah, Nathaniel, Rina, Chana, Tehila, Brocha, Shalom, Sarah, Eli, Judah, Nira, to his sister and brother-in-law, to Helene and Michael Adiran. We have many distinguished rabbis who are here, rabbis representing completely the spectrum of the Orthodox community in Englewood, and we want to acknowledge their presence. We're very grateful for all of you who are here, for Rabbi Ganak, for Rabbi Pupko, for Rabbi Block. What Fred and Judy certainly were able to pass on was the sense of commitment, of Kabbalah's all, accepting the yoke, the responsibility. I want to begin by calling upon Rabbi Dale Polikoff, the rabbi of the Great Neck Synagogue, to read a parak of Tehillim.
Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach ba'atzas resha'im, u'v'derech chata'im lo amad, u'v'moshav leitzim lo yashav, ki im b'soras Adonai cheftzo v'soraso yehegeh yomam v'laylo, v'haya ke'etz shasul al palgei mayim, asher piryo yitain bi'ito v'alehu lo yibol, v'chol asher ya'aseh yatzliach. Lochein harishaim ki im kamotz asher tidfenu ruach, al kein lo yakumu rishaim ba'mishpat v'chata'im ba'adas tzadikim, ki yodea Adonai derech tzadikim v'derech rishaim toved.
Rabbi Shmuel Ismach, Rabbi Young Israel of Great Neck.
Mizmor David Adonai miyagur ba'alecha miyishkon b'har kodshecha holech tamim ufoel tzedek v'dover emes b'lvavo lo rogal al leshono lo asa l'reyehu ra'a v'cherpa lo nasa al kravo nivze be'einav nimas ve'esirei Adonai yechabed nishpa l'harav v'lo yomir kaspo lo nasan b'neshech v'shochad al noki lo lokach ose ele lo yimot le'olam.
My relationship with Fred and Judy goes back a little while. I actually remember exactly how far it goes back. It goes back to the beginning of September of 1975, 44 years ago. It's when the small, tiny young Israel of Great Neck had hired me to become their rabbi, and at that point was in a storefront institution. I was still single. I did not get married to Abby until 1977, March of 77. And so I was homeless. I was only coming out for weekends. Wasn't being paid an awful lot. I was still continuing to learn in YU, even though I wasn't being paid there now, because they instituted a policy unlike what we have, Kollel Elyon, the Yadin Kollel. They threw us out. Bernie Lander, Dr. Bernard Lander, Zechat Tzadik Livrocha, always being an opportunist, saw an amazing opportunity. And so he came to recruit the guys who were no longer able to sit and learn at Beis Medrash YU and at least get paid. So he recruited people like Rabbi Menachem Genack, Rabbi Nochem Sauer, who was Rosh Yeshiva, my dear friend the Chavrusa for many years, Rabbi David Silber and myself, and others. And so we ended up down in Landers in the Toro Kollel for the first year. And it was right around that time that a fellow by the name of Matthew Hirschhorn, who was about Chuvin, who I had met while I was teaching part-time at Lincoln Square Synagogue, started learning with me. And he was single. He had been divorced. I was single. He said, I'm single because I haven't found the right girl. You're single because what Jewish girl is going to marry a boy without a job? And so he took it upon himself to try to find me a job. He first tried to get Rabbi Riskin to hire me for the new Yeshiva High School in Riverdale. That failed. Then he said to me, you know what? There's a tiny little shul in Great Neck that just got started and doesn't have a rabbi. Maybe you want to become the rabbi of the shul. And I didn't. I had never intended to go into the rabbinate. And he just drove me nuts week after week until he finally convinced me to take the number of Bill Kufeld. But first he had to do a job on Bill Kufeld to get me to do this. And so when I became the rabbi, with no place to really live, they rented a room for me in the Weisberg home, right opposite, exactly opposite the home of Fred and Judy Lewis and their wonderful children on the corner of Baker Hill Road and Hampshire. That was the beginning of an intense 44-year relationship. I can't even accurately capture the unbelievable contribution that Fred, with Judy always at his side, made for our community. He was a person who did not grow up in an Orthodox home, did not attend yeshiva, but slowly, over time, he began to become more and more spiritual, more and more interested in growth, not just doing mitzvahs, but serious growth, intellectual growth, because Fred was a tremendous intellectual. He was a history teacher at Great Neck North. He was a brilliant teacher who had a sterling reputation. And whatever he did par excellence. And so when he started getting into observance and Yiddishkeit, it wasn't just going through the acts of Shemiras HaMitzvos. It had to involve serious learning. And so shortly after I got there, I decided we should start a minyan. There was no minyan. And I needed to have a minyan to daven. And then we decided, you know what, we should start a little shiur before the minyan. 6:10 a.m. Fred was one of the first on board. And until he was unfortunately stopped by this dreaded disease, he remained a steady attendant at that minyan for decade upon decade upon decade. He made siyumim on Masechtas that he learned the Chavrusa with others, and some of them himself. He taught himself how to lane, and he became a wonderful Baal Koreh that often laned in our shul. He was a person who understood what Kabbalah's all means, to accept the yoke of communal responsibility. President of the North Shore Hebrew Academy in those days especially was no easy thing. There was a tension building between those who were Orthodox and many people who sent to the day school who were not Orthodox. And it meant walking a tightrope to figure out how to keep Shalom Bayis within this large, diverse institution. And Fred mastered that. And then he became the president of Young Israel. And it was unbelievable in his passion, his devotion, his ability to try to implement more learning programs, more activities for youth, and really to build and grow our institution. He was a person who had outstanding, impeccable midos. And he grew, and he grew, and he grew. I remember many times that he made siyumim on different small masechtos that he had learned. He wanted to be able to make up in his later years what he had failed to have in his earlier years. Judy, we can't even express the degree of awe and just the inspiration that you have been. A marriage over 50 years that was so filled with tremendous happiness and harmony and creating the most beautiful of family. But we know that the last few years have been very, very hard, almost like Gehenna. You stood at his side. You were there to guide him, to help him every step of the way, and to figure out what would create the best and most peaceful and secure environment for him. And I'm sure you added years to his life. It is a huge loss for our community. But the persona of Fred Lewis, always walking Hatznei Alechas im Hashem Elokecha, with humility, with modesty, never looking for accolades, no ego, just a desire to be an Eved Hashem, to serve him the most real, sincere way. He transformed the Great Neck community. And that will bring B'nai Hashem for you, Judy, for the children, and for the grandchildren, and we hope for many great-grandchildren to come, tremendous zechuyos that will bless you and bring you tremendous happiness. We're going to hear a number of talks from the children. I know it's going to be difficult for them, very, very hard to say farewell to such a beloved father. But we very much appreciate that you're willing to do so. I don't think I had the list of what order you want to do it in, so you just follow one after the other. Okay, we begin with Daniel.
When I saw my father lying on the bed after he passed, his face was fully relaxed. He was truly at rest. This was jarring to me because seeing my father at total rest was completely unfamiliar. This was true certainly during the majority of his life when he was healthy, and also true for the years of his illness. During his life, he never stopped doing. He was a man of action. During his healthy years, my father saw being an Eved Hashem, a servant of God, and the responsibility of being bound by the 613 mitzvot as his greatest privilege. My father saw most things in life through the lens of Torah. If something needed to be done, he would always step up, no matter how challenging or humble the task. Whether it was being the president of the shul or local day school, laning on a regular basis, being a Bal Tefillah, or coaching Little League. Even cleaning the floors at the shul, whatever needed to be done, he did it, and always with a smile. All of the leadership roles he assumed in the community he did without regard for public recognition. If someone else would have wanted the responsibility, he would have been happy to defer, but he would never be so modest as to not fill the void. My father rarely wasted time. You could find him preparing for learning or laning, reading a book about history. Time in the car was another opportunity for him learning. I have memories of countless hours of Rabbi Beryl wine tapes as we drove back to YU at the beginning of the school week. My father would not only go to Minyan 3 times a day, he would go to the Gemara class before Minyan as well. My father was a teacher at the Great Neck North Public High School for over 40 years. Numerous former students had commented to me over the years on what a great teacher he was. When I asked my father what his approach was, he commented that he would try to get the students engaged with one another in discussion and then step back. He referred to this as the magic of his profession. My father was particularly interested in the young people. He was passionate about the Hashkama Minyan, which he started at the Young Israel about 40 years ago. Similar to his approach in the classroom, my father's mission was to step back, take zero credit, and merely be a facilitator, to have the teens run the minyan completely. A minyan in which the daveners, laners, and gabayim were all teens was his dream. I have fond memories of those years. In the same way that he engaged with the students and the teenagers in the Hashkama Minyan, he would engage with everyone around him. He was fully with whomever he spoke. He would make people feel special, always in a genuine and sincere way. At the heart of it, I think that my father saw people and appreciated them. My father taught my brothers and I how to lane for our bar mitzvah, as well as his grandson and my nephew Itamar. In addition, my father taught a number of local Great Neck boys how to lane their bar mitzvah parsha, all at no charge, with no need for recognition whatsoever. While my parents socialized with their friends at the Shabbos table, more often than not, the priority of who was at the table tilted towards the people in the community in need, who were alone or without a place. Guests at my parents' Shabbos table always felt at home. As the oldest boy in our family, I was the beneficiary of much of my father's energy. He taught me how to pitch and how to hit a baseball and how to take a layup and drive to the basket, both left-handed and right. He taught me the importance of that first step when driving to the basket and how to run proper patterns as a football receiver. My dad would come to all my basketball games and pick me up from practice late at night from MTA High School in Washington Heights. In my college years, we played a lot of tennis together. He never got upset when he played sports and was perfectly happy whether he won or lost. Through sports, we had a great connection and spent a lot of time together. In combating his illness, my father's will was fierce. He walked to the library and back every day while he was able. And he prepared his Gemara for his Chavrusa, and he did not stop until he had to. He kept on going to daily minyan even as it became a challenge to drive and late tefillin. He kept on going to classes despite the decline in his cognition. Ultimately, his will succumbed and was no match for his dreadful disease. No matter what the physical therapist or trainer asked my father to do, he was up for it, no matter that the disease was ever progressing, and no matter that the benefits of such work seemed to be fleeting. Incredibly, he stayed optimistic and never complained, despite the most challenging of circumstances. In this way, my father was the perfect embodiment of being a man of faith. He inspired me because he never lost faith, despite the fact that he had every reason to. He always focused on how lucky he was and what he had, rather than on what he did not. He chose to focus on the joy that his 4 children and 14 grandchildren brought him, rather than on his own suffering. As crazy as it sounds, my father really did see himself as fortunate and lucky. I would like to acknowledge Rabbi Yaakov Lerner and the Young Israel of Great Neck. My father regarded Rabbi Yaakov Lerner in the highest esteem as his Rebbe. He loved the Young Israel of Great Neck and was fully committed to the success of the shul. I would also like to thank the community for supporting my family through these difficult years in all of the myriad ways that you have. I want to conclude by acknowledging my mother, my father's life partner. During the healthy years, my mother inspired our family to take trailer trips across the country and take adventurous sabbatical years in Israel. My mother agreed to go on the journey with my father to become from, even as neither were raised this way. I am forever grateful for the home of love, respect, and strong values that you and Dad built and raised us. During the years that my dad became ill, my mother proved herself to be the strongest and bravest person that I know. In her own gentle way, she too has a will of iron. She, with the help of some fantastic aides, have cared for my father for nearly a decade, all at home. My mom always stayed optimistic and resilient. She remained steadfastly strong during this marathon of an illness. She bore the challenge virtually single-handedly and was loath to impose any hardship onto her children. She's a genuine hero and has our full admiration, love, and respect. So I hope that my father is in Olam Ha'emet now and can finally get some rest. And I hope that by getting a glimpse into who my father was and some stories about him, it might provide some inspiration to each of you, for that is what he would have wanted.
These past 10 years have been difficult for everybody, difficult for us. I still remember the first family Hanukkah. We got together every Hanukkah about 10 years ago or 8 years ago. And the disease had been with Dad it was just the beginning of it. And we were walking home from shul in Highland Park, and Dad fell. And it was just so jarring for all of us. He fell. He had a big gash on his nose, and that was the beginning of the decline. And it steadily increased, and we've all saw it, and it's just been so hard. But now's a time that we have to remember his good years and what he contributed to us, to the community. My dad was a great man, and Chazal put greatness in specific terms. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. It says, "Ezehu chacham halomed mikol adam." Who is the wise man? Someone who has the ability to learn from every man. My father grew up, as was mentioned, in a traditional home. They had a Pesach Seder. They went to Yom Kippur, but they weren't religious. Early in his life, there was a man named Mr. Solomon who had a profound influence on my father. Mr. Solomon, he formed the Bachurei Chemed, the Bach Shul in Long Beach. And he used to schlep in people, teenagers, Jewish teens, off the street from public school. And my father was one of those boys. And he taught him how to lane, he taught him how to daven. And that became an influence in my father's life that carried forth throughout his whole life. My father was always a growing man, someone who learned from everyone. And his goal, one of his missions in life was to teach everyone around him. And when my oldest sister was born, my father, with my mother at his side, made the decision that we are going to join an Orthodox shul. We're going to become Shomer Shabbos. Our family is going to become religious. And it was a constant growth that we witnessed in our father. Later on, with his leadership and, of course, my mother at his side, in 1980, 81, he took the family on a sabbatical to Israel. And there, he was also Lomed Mikol Adam. He sat every day. He would go to the Mir Yeshiva, and he would learn with the Kollel people. And he was able to just learn and continue to grow, even though he was way below their level. He had the humility to be able to learn from every person. And as was mentioned, he was a chassid, without payas, but he was a chassid of Rabbi Lerner. He had stacks and stacks of tapes on every single parsha, and repeat parshas, where very often there were maybe repeat information, but about 5 years worth of Parsha Shiurim from Rabbi Lerner, which he used to listen to all the time. He would have the tape cassette recorder, that they had in like 1982, and he would put it in front of Rabbi Lerner, who would make the tapes, and it was so inspiring to see the respect that he had for Rabbanim and for Rabbi Lerner, and it just made such an impact on all of us. He was just a chacham in that sense, and he imparted that to all of us. And it was just amazing. It says, the next part of the Mishnah, it says, Ezehu Gibor, Hakovesh is Yitzra, who is the strong man, who is the mighty man? He who subdues his inclinations, someone who can go against the tide, not necessarily do what's popular. But that was my father. It didn't matter that nobody else was doing it. He became religious, despite all the inertia around him. And he was able to impart that to us. I remember when I was growing up, he saw a disco bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, something wrong. And he implored me not to go. And he knew I would not listen to him. But it didn't matter, because that was the right thing. And, I laughed it off at the time. And of course, he also sat me down to learn Gemara with him every Sunday morning. He used to schlep me to Minyan. I didn't want to go. He used to make me learn Gemara with him for a half hour after Minyan before we would pitch and have our warm-ups for Little League. And it was like pulling teeth. I didn't enjoy it. And I know I'm raising children now, and I don't know if I would have the fortitude to insist that my children would do something that they really didn't want to do. But he did it because it was the right thing. And it didn't matter that I didn't want to do it because it was the right thing. And ultimately, the lesson that I think we all learned is that if it's the right thing, Yikov Hadin Asahar, that the truth will cut through a mountain. And it doesn't matter the resistance, because my father, even till the last day, when he was fighting his illness, he refused to wear sneakers in his illness. It would have been much easier when he was walking to just put on a pair of sneakers, but he insisted he's going to do it his way. He had this strength, this gavura about him that was remarkable. The next part of the Mishnah, it says, Ezehu Ashir hasamech bechelko. Who's the rich man? He was happy with whatever he has. We used to ask my father, Dad, are we rich? And my father always used to say, yes, we're the richest people in the world because we have 4 wonderful children. And he used to mean it. There was nothing more in life that my father loved than his children and his grandchildren. In his illness, as it progressed, sometimes he didn't respond to adults, but when I would bring my children into the room, his face would light up. He would just transform. There was nothing in the world that gave him more joy than his children and his grandchildren. My father was the ultimate optimist. There was never a cross word from my father. He was always positive and looking at the bright side of things. We would go camping every year. That was something that we looked forward to as a family. And in Lake George, it tends to rain sometimes. And it would be no problem. Okay, it's a little rain, that's great. Get more water in the lake we could drink from. He used to say, are you made out of sugar? You're not going to melt, don't worry. It's okay. Complaining to my father was just trivial. I never heard him complain. I never heard him speak badly about someone. He was always looking at the positive of everybody, always looking at the good. It's something, again, that will stay with us forever. And finally, the Mishnah concludes, Ezehu mechubad, who is the honored person? Hamechabed es habrios, someone who honors all those around him. And this is a hallmark of my father. Every person that he would interact with, every person that he would speak to, he had his full attention. He would totally give them the utmost respect. I remember when the first time I brought Esther to the home. It was in the summer. It was a barbecue, and we had some of the family over, and it was very nice. And it was a very special time. And it was a Sunday, and we heard a knock on the door. Who was it? It was a meshulach asking for tzedakah. So I know what I would have done. But my father brought him into the house. He sat him down on the couch. He heard his story, gave him some money. And that is just one example of totally giving honor to every single person. My brother mentioned our Shabbos table. It was not, the cool crowd. We didn't always have the friends over. I mean, we had friends over, my family, my parents' friends. But we also had people who, could use a little love, use a Shabbos meal, and they loved it. They genuinely had these real relationships with everyone around them. We would always meet people on the street. And if I was walking with my father and they said, "Oh, wow, Mr. Lewis is your father. Wow, he was the best teacher." And as Dan mentioned, it was because that he gave the respect to every single person. He made them feel like $1 million. He really cared about them. Every friend of mine who would come over, he would engage them. It wasn't just like, one of Josh's friends or whatever. He really cared about people. He really cared about everyone. And it's just something that made my father just such a special, special man. As my brother mentioned, I think my father's final wish, he was, and really what ties together all of these four character traits, the way that Chazal define them, is this hallmark of humility, that it's this other-directed quality that my father had. It's never about himself. And I know that at his funeral, my father would only want us to talk about him insofar as it would lead to our own actions, to carry forth his own legacy. That, of course, is what the Hesped is about. And I hope that me and my family and my siblings and all of us and his community, that we could all carry forth my father's legacy and bring it into our own lives in some way, because that's what he would have wanted.
Gosh, Josh and Danny, that was beautiful. I'm afraid my own words are going to be a little more clumsy than my two brothers. When I came here tonight, every time I would meet someone from Great Neck, telling me there's a little story about my dad, I'm like, oh gosh, I should have said that in the speech. There's a lot I'm going to leave out. Try to give a little something. Forgive me if it's a little repetitive. We didn't really compare notes regarding what we were going to say, but bear with me as I give my own tribute to my dad. My dad was the youngest of three kids. He was raised in a traditional Jewish home in Long Beach, Long Island. My dad, at least in my own mind's eye, was probably the prototypical all-American boy. He would freely admit that he spent most of his free time in his youth playing basketball and stickball with the neighborhood kids, including one Larry Brown, who my dad would grudgingly admit was okay. I'm pretty sure he was a decent athlete because I grew up surrounded by his various sports trophies, which were stored in my room growing up. He loved to share stories about he and his big brother Leonard would go to the polo grounds all by themselves and catch a ball game. However, no story about his childhood would be complete without the inclusion of how Shabbos morning would be spent at the Bach, the local Orthodox shul. There at the Bach, my dad was taught to lane by Mr. Salman. Dad never ever lacked a hakarat tov for his teachers, and he made sure that Mr. Salman's name was remembered and venerated within the Lewis household. He knew where he came from. Excuse me. These basic lessons of Yiddishkeit that were instilled in his early childhood lay dormant for a while as my dad reached early adulthood and became distracted by other pursuits. He went on to enlist in the Navy and made use of the GI Bill to attend Columbia, where he got his master's. And then he got a job teaching history at Great Neck North, where he was lucky enough to meet and marry my mom. As mom and dad settled down and each of my siblings began to arrive, the foundational values of his Yiddishkeit and his sense of community that had been dormant began to emerge. Dad understood that Judaism at its core was all about the family unit and the community, and he poured his life essences into the furtherance of each of these things. Dad became more active within the shul when the Young Israel formed, and he jumped in with 2 feet to help get it off the ground. Aided in no small part by the inspiration provided by the newly hired Rabbi Lerner, his spiritual growth accelerated from one year to the next. Dad was an absolute fixture at Daily Minyanim. He served as president of Young Israel. He served as president of the school. He was always involved. As a dad, he was literally always there, always home for dinner, always there to have a catch and to encourage me when I was feeling down, to give me advice, whether I wanted it or not. He was an investor at heart, and we were his investments. He began the Shabbos morning Hashkam youth minyan at Young Israel, and he modeled the minyan upon his experiences all those days ago at the Bach. He insisted that the bar mitzvah age kids play a prominent role in the minyan as gabayim, as laners, as daveners from the Amud. When I and my brothers reached bar mitzvah age, he sat each of us down and taught us the laning just as he had been taught. But boy, did he have high standards. See, my dad understood that he was a link in the chain, and he took the responsibility to pass on his heritage to us quite seriously. Gosh, if you ever mispronounced the Shvanah as a Shvanach, he would let you know it. You'd have to start the whole pasuk all over again from the beginning. I mentioned before that my dad was a dedicated minyan man during his years. It didn't matter whether it was raining, it didn't matter if it was bitter cold. Fred Lewis was going to be there for minyan. I distinctly remember Shabbos, it snowed so much we couldn't even get the front door open. That was no excuse to miss shul. Out the window we went, all 4 of us. We made our way to shul, covered with a million layers, but we got there. While that was a great story, what truly amazed me, though, was the strength of will my dad had in continuing to go to minyan, even when the Parkinson's made it incredibly difficult to do so. Quite frankly, it was dangerous. Josh related the story about how he fell, and he didn't just graze his nose, he actually tore a hole through his lip. Dad had a will of iron, though, and he never allowed his physical frailties to derail him from going to minyan because it was just the right thing to do. We tried every which way to dissuade him from going, but to no avail. It was only at the point where his mind began to slip that we were able to contain the man. I mentioned before how lucky my dad was that he met my mom, and it's true. Now, before I talk about that, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge my dad's caregivers, Marianne, Jesse, and Sharon, and Nico before that. Thank you all for taking such great care of my dad. I don't know how we could have done it without you guys. I really, really appreciate you guys. I want to talk about my mom for a little bit because no eulogy about my dad can be complete without talking about my mom. Dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's 10 years ago, and those last years were difficult. My mom's strength and compassion and her determination to take care of my dad are just unbelievable. I suppose in her own way, Mom, you absorbed Dad's iron will and his stubbornness, and you refused to let anyone else take care of him outside of the home. You let him age in place and ultimately pass away in peace. You never once wavered in your resolve to see this through. but he's in a better place now. Mom, you're amazing. Dad, as Judah's bar mitzvah is approaching, it pains me that you will not be there to hear him laid. I hope we all make you proud. Thank you.
So yesterday when I heard the news, I was in school. I had just left Minion when I got the call, and the first thing that I thought of was a poem called The Dash by Linda Ellis, and it really just struck me how much this poem really encapsulated my grandfather. I'm going to read a couple lines from it. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke the following day with tears, but he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time that they spent alive on earth, and now only those who love them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love, and how we spend our dash. To me, my grandfather was someone that really valued that dash and lived his life to the fullest each and every day, even when it got hard for him and difficult, and his memory and body began to fade. He still tried his hardest and lived through his grandkids, through Grandma, who helped him each and every day. One of my earliest memories with him was when I was, I think, like 6 or 7. Him and my dad would go to the basketball court around the corner from their house, and I would shoot a basketball, and I would miss terribly, and each and every time he would say, "Great shot," and he'd keep on encouraging me, rebounding for me. I'd airball it, I'd horribly miss it, and he would be there each and every time, just giving me the ball, giving me the encouragement to keep on going and keep on trying. He lived his life to the fullest possible heights, and everyone's lives around him were changed for the better because of that. And I think that he would want that everyone here to know that he would want you to live your dash to the fullest, just as he did each and every day. Be missed.
Excuse me. I want to call upon Rabbi Ian Lichter, Assistant Rabbi at the Great Neck Synagogue, and Mishpacha to the Lewis family to say the Kel Mali Rachamim.
El Malirachamim Shochein Bamromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashkina B'mahalos Kedoshim Utehorim Kezohara Mazhirim Es Nishmas Revival Yitzchak Ben Naftali David Shalach Lolama Ba'avur Sha'anachnu Mispalalim Bad Hazkaras Nishmaso Began Eden Tehei Menuchaso Lachein Ba'al HaRachamim Yastireyu B'Seiser Kinafav La'olamim V'yitzor b'tzora chayim es nishmaso Adonai hu nachalaso V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar amen.
Interment is going to take place at the cemetery in Lodi, New Jersey. The shiva is going to be split between Englewood and Great Neck. Suggest everyone take a look at the emails that were sent out from the various shuls. We are in the period of getting very, very close to the Yom Hadin of Rosh Hashanah, just a few days away. Very famous Mishnah, Pirkei Avos, Da Lifnei Miyad Ta'omeid, Lifnei Miyad Ta'asid Litain Din V'Cheshbon. The difference between Din V'Cheshbon is that Din is the impact in terms of your own actions on yourself. Cheshbon is the impact of your actions on others. It's a time for learning Musar Sfarim. Sometimes it's the embodiment of what Musar Sfarim are all about. A life like Fred Lewis's extraordinary life. It should be a Musar Sefer for all of us as we enter into the Yemei Hadin and understand what really matters in life and what doesn't matter all that much. We ask the immediate family, not the children, but the other close members of the family and close friends to be the pallbearers as we take out the Aron.
Yes,